Clinton Rocky with the Portland National Weather Service. Clinton, thank you for joining me this afternoon. We are just now getting into summer, and you might call me sensitive to the seasons. I like things warm and sunny most of the time, so I'm probably in the wrong neck of the woods. But I was doing a survey of how we've been looking since the month of January, just looking at the monthly mean temperature. And I was surprised to see that more than half of the months from January till now have actually been a little bit above normal, because I feel like we've been in this cold tundra. And then I was surprised to see, looking at our rainfall, because I feel like it's been raining like every day except for recently. And only January and February were actually above normal in those
Right.
rainfall totals for the month. So now my question for you, Clinton, is when we're talking about Enso phases and changing from El Nino to La Nina, with maybe a brief pause for Enso neutral, is there anything in particular we can expect for summer?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag, actually. We often see in these transition years when we go from an El Nino into La Nina, we typically will see a cooler than normal summer for our region. Um, to give you an example, 1954 was a strong transition period, and we didn't even make 90 degrees that year. Now, this isn't 1954, it's a lot later. But the overall trend is still showing up on all the modern years that we've had La Nina transitions as well. Seeing a little cooler than normal winter summers patterns. So there's hope that we will wind up being downward or closer to the normal range as we go through the rest of this month and into June and August. One little caveat I'll have to add to people is we have seen that overall trend across the globe, seeing a little warmer each year and each year as we go into this. So I think a little bit of that might mitigate some of that cooling. But overall, I think we're going to wind up with one of those pleasant summers that we often talk about to everyone back east who's complaining about the heat. And we're all saying, oh, it's been a pretty lovely summer out here in the Northwest.
Yeah, summer definitely my favorite time. And so often when we talk about transitioning into our next Enso phase, we are usually focused on winter. And
Right.
I get that. But so many people really want to know, as we transition and we're moving into our next phase into La Nina, does La Nina ever offer scary looking wildfire seasons going from summer into fall as we go August, September, October?
Well, we really can't. I've not seen a strong correlation between the two. The one thing we have to worry about as we get into the wildland fire season is two things, actually. One, how much growth got going thanks to springtime precipitation, the grasses, the shrubs, all that kind of stuff gets going. Then we go into the normal drying out in June and July for that stuff. Then the big question is to get fires going. One, do we have anything to trigger the fires, such as an active monsoon moisture pattern, like we're seeing right now in the desert Southwest, where we have strong moisture coming up out of the Baja California into the desert Southwest? Will that moisture make it up the Sierras into the Cascades to provide thunderstorms for us? And two, if that stuff doesn't provide thunderstorms, what does the unknown factor, the human factor, going to do for us? Are we going to have one of those lovely summers where everyone wants to take their boat to the east side or across the mountains and to the lakes, where you get the change dragging on the roadside, get a little spark into the grass, and then off you go with a little fire, or the trains coming over the mountains, uh, campfires left unattended for the overnight and in the morning hours? That's always a factor. We never know how to well do with that. This northwest pattern, as you know, we get dry come July and August. There's not a lot of moisture around usually. So our forest fuels will be more receptive to burning. Whether we can get them burning, that's the key to whether we're going to have an active fire season or not. And right now, based on what we've been seeing with the trends, we're likely going to wind up with a typical dryness to the mountain country and seasonable warmth. But barring any massive heat ridges or huge warm-ups, which the pattern doesn't favor that, we might just be an okay year for us on the west side.
I like how you brought up, human behavior. It's really hard to predict that. It, Even the best meteorologist can't determine, what a person is going to do,
No,
let alone what is coming down the road, months down the road.
right,
I think the other subject that I really want to hit on is the historic heat wave from 2021. And
right.
we all remember it so well. So, anytime we talk about any kind of pattern change, I think the number one thing that comes to mind for folks living in the Pacific Northwest is, will we ever see the terrible repeat of June 2021? And June 28th, that's coming up this week, where we hit
Right.
116 degrees. How likely is that to repeat?
Unfortunately, if I had the inside knowledge to tell you, I wish I could. I didn't think we were going to make 112 or 115 that week. I thought, oh, the computer models, they've got to be out to lunch on this pattern. But lo and behold, here we go. 3 days in a row, we shatter our all-time temperatures for the region. And even, I don't know if you remember right, but 119 degrees down in Salem. And for when I dug up, that was one of our warmest temperatures ever recorded west of the Cascades in Washington and Oregon in history. So that's phenomenal. We're talking about data going back to the mid 1800s. So to see this repeat itself again, odds are not great. But then again, we're going through a period now where changes can be a little more expected, I suppose to say. The frequency of extreme events seems to be increasing a way bit more than it used to be. So hopefully not in our lifetimes, but just the magic 8 ball is still showing me a reply hazy at this point.
Yeah, so is mine. I suppose it's possible. I mean, we could have a series of days up to 108, 110. I mean, so
Yeah,
much is possible. Um,
yeah.
are there
It
any?
doesn't look,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
it doesn't look like in this summer. I don't see the odd. It looks like to me we're probably going to get 1, maybe 2 days where we get above 100. Don't see that hot stuff there. One thing that's interesting though is the fact that you were talking about extremes, and we're talking about extremes at 112. Interestingly enough, one of the really strong La Ninas we've had in the past is probably quite memorable for those who have been around the Northwest for a while. The 1949-1950 La Nina, and if that rings a bell to anybody, that's the year when downtown dropped below 0 degrees. We had extremely cold air there in late January, and that is not an uncommon thing to see in La Nina patterns, where we stay fairly close to normal temperature-wise until about mid-January, and then we get our cold breaks, and that's kind of goes to play with the fact that the northern Rockies, the northern plains, that's the bulk of their cold airs, and a lot of cold air gets back into the Rockies and filters back into our area. But we shall see.
Well, I got to tell you, if it never snows again, I'll be fine with that.
Yeah. Well,
Totally.
it's going to be a great year for the Cascades. That looks good, and that always. I mean, we always like to have big snow. In fact, last year, if you look at the numbers, a good. We're talking about the fires in Eastern Oregon and Washington right now. That's an area that did not get a whole lot of moisture last winter. We had big deficits across Washington into the northern Rockies, where they only saw about half of the normal snowpack for the winter season. And that's because the El Nino cycle kept all the big storms drifting between us and California. California got lots of precipitation, as you recall back from the media, and the big storms back in February and into early March. But Washington kind of missed out, and that's what we're seeing now is they didn't get a lot of rain this spring. It's warmed up out there, things have dried out, and fire is taken off a little more. A lot of the forest fuels are more receptive to fire spread now, and that's where we're seeing our main problems out there from northeastern Oregon up into the east slopes of the Washington Cascades. It looks like I don't see that really changing a whole lot the rest of the summer. East side's still going to be an area where if people are playing in the outdoors and recreation, as well as the interface between the city and the interface between the timber areas, that's something those are the areas that are going to be still of concern through September.
And we haven't had any red flag warnings for your forecasting area, the Portland area or beyond yet, right?
No, not yet. Typically in a season, we don't see a whole lot of that activity getting up and going to mid-July when we really start drying out the west side. Barring a massive heat wave in June, we typically don't see a big flare up on our dryness of our fuels on the west side until we get into mid-July, and then we start getting a little more concerned, especially if we start getting monsoon and moisture coming up. If the monsoons come up the Sierras into the Cascades, you get these showers and thunderstorms will develop. You might get 1, maybe 2 days of activity, and then the pattern shifts and the southwest flow returns and all the storm activity shifts back into the Great Basin and Idaho. And then our Cascades are left with sunny skies and increasing west winds, which is drier. So any fires that get started, any lightning that can actually get something to light up, like a smoldering fire, that dry, warm, breezy west winds the next day or two afterwards, then we'll start seeing those fires get fanned up with new oxygen and they come to life. So that's kind of the pattern we start watching for. Typically is late July, middle of July into middle of August kind of seems to be our main problem. And then, of course, we have to deal with the return of easterly winds as we get into September. So we'll never know what happens with those patterns.
Question about the month of June. So 1.63 inches is the normal for Portland, and so far we are sliding into the below normal month to date.
Right.
Yet another chance of rain coming up, but it seems like it's just not producing anything or won't produce anything.
No, I wouldn't expect it. It's not going to be the kind of rain that's going to dampen things down a lot. To our north, I think you got a good potential for some wetting rain, 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of rain up in the Mount St. Helens, maybe the Willapa Hills, North Coast Range. Tomorrow's system's pretty anemic, pretty spotty, light shower activity at best. We still got a better chance tomorrow night. Get another warm day Friday into Saturday, and then we have another system dropping into the region on Sunday and Monday. That one we could get a little rain out of that one, enough perhaps to turn the sprinklers off for a day or two, but it's not going to be enough. We're not talking about April, March type rainfalls. These are our classic summer patterns where you get maybe 500s to 1500s if someone's lucky enough to get under one of the heavier showers. Still no thunderstorms, just kind of cooler, cloudier weather for a bit.
One last question I have for you, Clinton, is about the experimental models talking about your risk level when it comes to heat. And I find this page to be extremely helpful in how we can communicate to the public about what to expect. You can say 85 degrees or say 95 degrees, but what does that mean to the average person? I like this new product that the National Weather Service has. Is there anything that you would like to expand on or items that we should be including when we're communicating with the public?
Well, one thing to keep in mind, I would say moderate and above, definitely those, we've started getting to moderate, definitely want to pay attention to that for just about any age group, any group of persons out there. That's the start. That's when we start getting issues, significant issues for people with heat stress and heat sicknesses. The minor qualifier, the minor heat risk, you'll see that a lot. It doesn't take a lot of temperature. Typically upper 60s, low 70s, we start getting to that minor heat risk. And for the majority of people, you're not going to notice anything. You might say, oh, maybe a break a sweat for a little bit. But the minor really, for the most part, is for those people that have heat sensitivity. That's because the elderly, very young people, like kids that are under the age of 2 or 3. This is the kind of heat that without some care, you could run into some problems. Again, it's a very small group of our population that have this kind of heat sensitivity. So most people, when they see minor, are probably not going to experience anything unless you really have been working outdoors heavily and heavily exerting yourself. But it's the moderate and above we start getting into problems. And when you get into major, that's when we're starting to talk about issues with where we may not have good cooling at night. And so the next day, if you're trying to get a good night's rest, without air conditioning or some good cooling mechanism, you could definitely be stressed out that next day. And if it's a prolonged heat event, that could definitely be quite bad for just about anyone. Again, it's the moderate and above we start being concerned about. And minor, not a whole lot of people are going to be impacted by that. But yeah, I'm hoping we do not see much major this year. And it does take a lot to get up there.
It does. All right. Have I left anything out that you wanted to hit on during this interview?
Not that I know of. I'm sure you might have other answers or have the answers. You might have more questions. I don't know.
Oh, I have a
Um,
thousand questions. We just don't. We don't
that's
have enough bandwidth or time here to make it
yeah.
happen.
One, yeah, I went back and looked up it. I got all kinds of little things. I sent you some of the graphics in your email
Yes,
that you
thank
can
you.
look at. We did another one this afternoon. I was looking at stuff and kind of figuring out. Went back and looked at all the transition years from El Nino into La Nina, and just about all of them show us winding up a couple degrees below normal for the summer as well as each of the months. There's a few that are warm here and there, but almost all of them overall for that June to mid-September timeframe, we wind up quite pleasant. And, there's fewer days above 90, which is always nice to have. And this is what I think this pattern this year it really is going to be one of those pattern summers. I think we'll wind up saying, yeah, it was a couple of warm days here and there, but boy, overall, compared to what we've had for the last 5 years, this actually was quite a treat.